Hi, Stories Channel here.
And today we're covering a 2019 Japanese thriller called Signal 100. The movie begins at a school where a teacher explains the concept of love and friendship and how certain things can occur without a warning. As he explains the theme, two lovebirds are involved in staring at each other. Their teacher remarks that they shouldn't stare at each other for more than 10 seconds. A girl stands up to mock them, for which he makes her sit down as she is wearing her gym clothes. Amidst all the activities, a decent-looking guy stares admirably at a cute and magnificent girl. Later, her friend tells her that Sakari was looking at her. On the other hand, Sakari observes an emo guy standing atop the building, pretending to shoot at students. The scene shows us empty hallways where a girl, Yoshikawa, enters her teacher's class and he gives her a DVD. He taps her head and she instantly drops in a trance. Her eyes flash gray for a moment, but return back to normal again. In the meantime, we see all the students in the classroom merrily doing their tasks. Some are planning to go on a trip, some are texting each other while the soccer team enjoys with Sakari, who's injured and has a bandage on his arm. Suddenly, one of the guys gets up and addresses the cute girl, Kashimura, to take a picture for them. Just as her friend provokes her, a bunch of other girls arrive and huddle around Sakari and they proceed to pamper him. In the interim, Yoshikawa enters the class and plays the DVD on the projector. Everyone watches the hypnotizing and psychedelic video that contained gross scenes. As it ends, they discuss what a confusing, ugly video that was. A guy tells Yoshikawa that she was late and suddenly, her body starts to twist and crack. She limps her way towards the window, climbs up the ledge with tears in her eyes and tips of the edge. Everyone watches in utter horror as their friend just killed herself in front of them. One guy tries to call an ambulance, but suddenly he also starts to contort and bites off his own wrist, which bleeds viciously, and he dies right on spot. As everyone analyzes the terror, a few more students jump off the edges and drop to their deaths. Just in that moment, their teacher enters the class and observes the dead bodies. He states that unpredictable things can happen anytime. He then explains that everyone who died and who's in this room is under hypnosis and certain actions will trigger the suicide. He calls those actions signals and states that there are 100 signals in total. In her fright, Kashimura's friend tries to call her mom via phone, but she's triggered as well and she bites off her own tongue and falls into Kashimura's arms. With that, a guy named Wada concludes that using a phone is also a signal. As their teacher enjoys the scene, one student gets furious and holds him by the collar, but he too gets triggered, and as the whole class watches in fright, he kills himself by banging his head against the wall. The teacher states that violence against others is a signal as well, upon which a girl starts crying and suddenly commits suicide. Upon that, it is known that crying is also a signal. Afterwards he leaves the class and a guy chases him, but the teacher threatens that going out of the classroom might be a signal as well. Later, as everyone sits and grieves on the deaths, Wada simply walks outside totally unharmed. With that, everyone leaves to find their teacher, Shinobi. In the meantime, Kashimura lays down her friend and accompanies the guys outside. Unfortunately, a girl named Saitomi runs away shouting for help, and at the edge of the road, she also commits suicide by twisting her own head. The students then conclude that going outside school boundaries might be a signal too, and their teacher suddenly arrives, confirming that going out of school, telling someone about hypnosis, and being saved by someone are all signals that will kill them. Afterwards, a girl named Sonata asks for the solution for hypnosis, and to answer that, he takes them back into the classroom. In the class, he reveals that the only way to get rid of the hypnosis is to be the last person alive while all others must die. Upon which Kashimura interrupts him and he gets triggered for a second but recovers. He then brings her forward and downgrades her aspirations, and afterwards walks to the edge and kills himself as well. Everything was too much for the students and they started to devise other ways for the breakage of hypnosis. It's advised that they work together and split up to look for clues and indications in Shinobi's room and computers as well. In the meantime, Wada catches a guy, Isawa, in the library who's taking out a book in English. Later, back in the classroom, everyone dictates that they found nothing at all anywhere. Suddenly, Wada returns with the book and tells everyone how the video hypnotized them. It was created by a cult in the 1980s to gain mind control. Wada also states that the only way to release the spell is by being the last person alive. But as a reassurance, the book contains 50 of the signals which they write down on the board. The class cheers for Wada and they proceed to decide about food and drinks. The guys from the soccer team offer to check the club room, but as they visit it, they find two guys who hanged themselves. Beside them, they find plastic bottles of a liquid that were partially emptied. In the meantime, Wada looked at them from the library. A girl named Sine is also in the library sifting through the books when Wada encounters her. He knew that she liked him, therefore he indulges her emotionally and takes her to the nurse's room where they proceed with their romance. Sanae follows his leads until he takes her hand to his groin but suddenly reveals that touching an aroused part is also a signal. That triggers her and she slashes off her throat with scissors. Wada smiles evilly when suddenly he witnesses Isawa dead behind the curtains with his hands down his pants. Sonata enters the room and states that he might have gotten horny. Afterwards, she shows the Japanese version of the book and states that she understands Wada's plan. As the sun recedes behind the horizon, the guys conclude that they can't drink alcohol or eat pork. One guy, General, blames Wada for being sketchy. Suddenly, a girl arrives and tells them about the death of Sanae. Everyone stands in grief but tries hard not to cry. One by one, they leave to look for Wada while Sanae's friend sits beside her dead body in a trance. On the other hand, General comes across Wada and they get involved in a cat and mouse chase. They finally end up in the laboratory where, amidst the heaves of breath, Wada offers General a bottle of watery liquid. Just in time, Kashimura also arrives and Wada offers her too. But they confront Wada about the suspicions to which he tries to clear by drinking the water. Immediately, General also takes a gulp but gets triggered. It is then revealed that Wada didn't actually drink it, but just kept it in his mouth and then threw it away. As the signal is revealed, General kills himself with a glass beaker and Wada escapes. Kashimura sits beside General, utterly devastated, when his friends also arrive. They watch their buddy, fully bled, on the floor and strive to control themselves. Kashimura affirms to them that it was Wada. Back in the classroom, Sonata tells everyone that there are 60 signals in total but Wada only states 50. Suddenly, a guy furiously charges at the book in her hand and opens it to find it a comic book. It triggers him and he kills himself by putting a light bulb in his mouth which bursts. In the interim, Wada enters the class and everyone backs away. Sonata informs him that she told them everything. Suddenly, Sanae's friend arrives and blames Wada for her death, upon which he just smiles and points his handgun at her. Back from the lab, one friend of Jen, Seiya, is pissed off as he blames everyone for listening to Wada and not him. Everyone tries to calm him down but he walks away in fury and Sakari runs after him while the girls watch in concern. Sakari catches up with Seiya and apologizes to him. As they stand in the hall, Wada passes them. They follow him outside where Seiya questions him angrily while Sakari tries to stop him. Suddenly 7 people surround them and Sonata provokes them to point at Seiya. We get to know that 7 people pointing at you is also a signal. Sakari is thrown down and Seiya gets all the signals and he strangles himself. Their fellows who are pointing escape in confusion while Sakari tries to save his friend. Just in time, Kashimura also arrives and watches Seiya die. They try to revive him but it's no use. Afterwards, Kashimura runs away and Sakari follows her. They catch up at the stairs and she tells him that she'll talk to Wada and Sakari agrees to accompany her. In the meantime, the lovebirds from the class hold each other and cry while they decide to die together. Kashimura finds them both impaled by spikes as they hold hands and stare at each other. She calls Sakari and they both analyze and something sparks their minds. Upon returning to the classroom, they find 2 more students dead. They start looking for the notes on the softboard but can't find any. Nevertheless, they try to remember the ones their teacher told them and Kashimura writes them down. The night falls in and Kashimura leaves the room to tell everyone about the remaining signals when they suddenly encounter 4 more students. They apologize to them and Kashimura tells them that she has a plan. Later she walks into a hall with disco lights where she comes across her friend Manoa. Unfortunately, she's now turned against Kashimura and tells her that there's no need for her. With that, 7 people surround her and 6 of them point at Kashimura. Wada and Sonata also arrive and just as they're discussing, Sakari arrives with his group and stands beside Kashimura. Now 7 from each group face one another. Sonata decides on signaling Sakari and 6 people point at him, except Wada. In return, Kashimura's group points as well and she states that now she knows all the 100 signals. She then reveals that the 36 rules Shinobi made them follow were actually signals. Yoshikawa being late, everyone with gym clothes dying, and the couple staring at each other. With that, she hands them the paper but they all lose their minds as they read the last signal that everyone is going to die by the morning. As Kashimura calms them down, Manoa gets agitated and compels everyone to point at her but nobody follows. In the meantime, Sonata's boyfriend arrives and stops others from charging at her. Suddenly, Wada appears on the stage, clad in a plastic coat and remarking that he's the only one who's figured out all of the signals. Afterwards, he takes out beer cans from his pockets and starts to shower everyone in alcohol, which was also a signal. Therefore, the action begins and most of them commit suicide including Sonata's boyfriend. That triggers her and she proceeds to kill Wada with a knife but the signal catches her and she plunges the knife in her own head. Nevertheless, she keeps on trying to kill him but doesn't succeed and eventually dies. In the interim, Manoa also charges to trigger Kashimura but ends up being showered in beer. Therefore, she bangs her head on the ground and kills herself while pleading with Sakari to save her. After the massacre, Wada escapes and Sakari follows him. We then see him collecting blood from a student while Sakari enters a room to come face to face with Wada and calls him Hayato-kun. In a gloomy mood, he states that someone hasn't called him that in a long time. Afterwards, they discuss that there's no way to break the hypnosis except the last person alive. With that, Wada mentions how once he told Sakari to commit suicide together. The scene then flashbacks into the past where we see both of them as kids and friends, agreeing to commit suicide. After the reminder, Wada expresses his emotions about how he wanted to talk to his childhood friend but Sakari was always busy with the soccer club and not him. With that, he pulls out the vial of blood and compels him by saying let's commit suicide. In the emotional turf, Sakari almost drinks it when Kashimura arrives with the guy Haru. He suddenly intervenes and breaks a glass bottle on Wada's head, triggering himself and ultimately stabbing himself with a knife. Wada limps away while Sakari struggles to save his friend. Alas, Haru also dies with one last smile. Afterwards, they lay him beside his other buddies in the club room and Sakari drowns in grief. He then retrieves 2 pills from his pocket stating that they can break the hypnosis and he found them in Shinobi's stuff. But as there are only 2, Kashimura states that they will discuss it with Wada. With that, she leaves and Sakari takes off his bandage and takes one last look at his friends. Meanwhile, Wada staggers on the stairs with a bloody head. Kashimura returns to the club room to find a note and a smartphone. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the rooftop where Sakari meets Wada and as they discuss their end, Kashimura also arrives there and states that both the guys can take the pills to lift off the hypnosis. In a flurry, Wada gulps down the pill and then Sakari suddenly reveals that they're nothing but pain tablets. With the reality revealed, Sakari attacks Wada and tries to kill him but gets triggered and stabs himself. Meanwhile, Wada also attacks back, gets triggered and finally commits suicide by falling off the edge. On the other hand, Sakari dies in Kashimura's arms. Later as she drags him beside his buddies, she opens the phone to find the video of the 4 friends who claim their love for Kashimura altogether. Tears flow down her cheeks as she watches all of them, now dead for her. The dawn arrives and she's the last person alive and we get to know that the hypnosis is finally lifted. 5 years later, she still hasn't forgotten and the scene now shows us that Shinobi is alive and well but in a cave, where he states that he loved the idea of students killing themselves. Kashimura appears in front of him, cladded in black and she plays the hypnotic video for him to let him taste his own evil. As he shrieks and shouts, Kashimura finally leaves. The ending scene now shows us Kashimura walking to her school and with a final last look on it, she turns back and the film concludes. Thanks for watching guys.